In returning from Gamescom, we at Digital Foundry were able to play a lot of games coming out in the near future, one of which was really stuck with us after the fact was Dying Light Bad Blood, kind of a battle royale DayZ-like game built on the foundations of Dying Light, which was the Polish studio Techland's first foray into the current generation of consoles and on PC as well. This game is, like I said, a DayZ-Light or Battle Royale game where you and 11 other players are stuck in a post-apocalyptic arena and try and escape via helicopter, but only one can make it out, and so you are kind of forced to fight each other until the end. It's pretty fast, and you have all the parkour that you're used to from the original game. But John, what did you think of Dying Light Bad Blood?
Well, okay, I have to say I'm not the biggest fan of the Battle Royale style games these days. Like, I do enjoy some PUBG once in a while, so I wasn't really sure what to expect here, but I have to admit, I had a lot of fun playing this, and I think it has to do with the nature of Dying Light, right? So there's two things I think that made this experience cool and it's worth checking out. And, you know, we'll talk about some of the tech as well, but for me, it's the parkour system and the melee focus. So
yes, definitely.
Mainly, like you play PUBG or you play Fortnite, as soon as somebody targets you, usually battles end pretty quickly, especially in PUBG.
Yeah.
You know, you go down fast. I mean, sometimes you have a distant standoff sort of battle, but when you're actually getting hit, you die quickly. Whereas in this, you can take a bit more punishment, specifically with the melee weapons, which means trying to take down another player can take time. So, like in this sequence here, for instance, like I had attacked this player, and I was basically going in for the kill, but it required sort of a parkour chase through part of the city to actually take him down. And it's really fun. Like, you're actually using the parkour to chase after someone. The environment is really busy and sort of, it's not just like an open field. And I found that surprisingly engaging, and, you know, it just, it weirdly stuck with me. I had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun too, and for basically the exact same reason. I'm not used to, in at least these games, kind of moving quickly, especially when there's a lot of PvE elements. Like in this game, it's just dotted around with all these zombies in the world and like these kind of larger zombie creatures.
Yeah, exactly.
And I spent most of my time trying to either avoid them or kind of run around them because I was constantly worried about people coming in from my flanks and things like that. So I was always constantly on the move, which was pretty different from my experience of more camping like in the rest of the genre. But I think that has a lot to do with the fact that the game's gunning for like really good performance, at least from what we saw. We were playing on pretty high-end spec PCs on G-Sync monitors that were targeting, I think, 144 hertz refresh rate, and it looked to be basically hitting it for most of the play. Obviously, this footage here is done through the NVIDIA capture, which is reducing it down to 60, so there may be some slight frame wobbliness here and there from the footage, the way it kind of captures down, but it was just smooth all the way. And this is coming off the legacy of a game that at the beginning of this generation was kind of, we, at least at Digital Foundry, especially Richard back then, used it as kind of a marking point to show the difference between consoles and PC specs of a similar kind of type. And it ran really well back then on a 750 Ti with like an i3, if I recall. And this game was just blazing. I mean, there's some necessary reductions I think they did. Like, just looking back and forth between the footage here of the first game and Dying Light Bad Blood, you can see that the environments are definitely less dense. There's less going on in them. There's like less individual assets kind of scattered around the level. But at the same time, it's more readable. You can definitely see where you're going to need to go. And a big part of that is the huge reduction in the post-processing pipeline here. Yeah, the first game, I mean, in between the depth of field and in between like the lots of motion blur and the chromatic aberration, which is still in Bad Blood, arguably, and the film grain, all these things, it was a hard to read game. And I just playing it again, I actually felt a little strange with the narrow FOV when playing it, and that's pretty rare for me. I have really good VR legs, but coming into Bad Blood on these monitors we were playing with extremely high refresh rates, it felt great, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of that, you know, the original game is designed to feel more, I guess, claustrophobic. You're supposed to feel under threat the whole time, where obviously Bad Blood is more competitive in nature, which also explains why they totally changed the tone and feel of the color scheme.
Yeah.
Because, the original game, it's
Which
it has that yellow filter look to it, I think, most of the time. And people have had colorful ways of describing that, but I think it looks fine in the original game. But
Yeah.
it's definitely a more colorful, brighter experience. But I guess what really sticks out to me, like you said, is the performance is amazing on the PC. So I'll be curious to see if the smaller map actually allows for smoother performance on the consoles, and also whether, since they have said it's coming to consoles, whether or not it's possible to deliver higher frame rates.
that's something I'm curious about.
Specifically on the Pro and the Xbox One X, which the original game does not support.
Yeah, and that was the one thing that we noticed back then with the PC version, at least, was that it was heavily CPU limited on consoles, presumably because you could look into the INI files and you could just look at the default draw distance of the game, which was higher on its lowest setting on PC than it was on consoles. So that looked like the area where they were struggling the most to get performance back then. And given how this game already cuts off a lot of assets and a lot of presumably background simulation,
Oh, yeah.
I could imagine that the Pro and maybe the Xbox One X, in the eventuality of this game coming to them, could have a 60 hertz unlocked mode, which I would find wonderful, because this game is, like fast-paced, you're moving around, all that extra bit of, lessened input latency is going to really help. And, there's some other things, too, that are different that I think that will help people who are used to higher frame rates kind of play this game. Like here, they heavily reduced the per object motion blur, which was in the original game. It's kind of stick to a curious camera motion blur implementation, which is usually not what you expect in a competitive game. At least I'm surprised that they didn't just cut it out completely. Maybe that was just for a demo. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'd hope so in the final game. But they,
I'm sure it's an option, right? At least on the PC.
At least on the PC version, I hope. But to get it running better in general, you also see things like the removal of SSR on water surfaces, which the first game had, which were rather weird looking. I mean, it was there, so you at least saw some reflection, but it was always at the wrong perspective and didn't look correct. So
yeah, it wasn't a great implementation.
No, I think it's just early days for that kind of tech back then.
Yeah, exactly.
And they've kept some other things which are kind of curious, like indirect shadows and indirect lighting. You can see underneath this train car here, or in the original game, like kind of scattered throughout most of the game, like underneath cars, or even in indoor sections, you can see like very dramatic baked lighting and baked shadows, which they've kept, but obviously since they want the game to be completely readable, most of it is kind of pared back. There isn't a lot of super intense indirect lighting and places for you to hide in shadow as much as the original single-player game. But, it's all in service of a multiplayer good.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess I'll be curious to learn more about how much the engine has changed, since we know for sure that its sequel, the sequel to Dying Light 2, is being designed with what they call the C engine now, which is sort of the evolution of the Chrome engine. But obviously, Bad Blood is still running on the same basic technology.
Yeah, and it looks it too.
As the original Dying Light. But it's been years since its release, so it's entirely possible that there's been some improvements happening in the background.
I would hope that it's presumably more parallelized at this point in time, since they've had so much time with it. Because I think back then at the start of this generation of consoles, that there was still a good amount of work to be done to make games run across more cores more efficiently, especially on PC. So I'd hope, at least for getting this game out, like currently the minimum specs are the exact same as Dying Lights, as I mentioned already. So, but in our playthrough, I can imagine this running way better on top of the reduced assets, the reduced settings that they seemingly have, and also I would hope optimization that so it scales across more cores, which I would imagine is something that the C engine is doing in Dying Light 2, and we also got to look at that again right after playing Bad Blood. And I think the difference was really stark. The C engine, as it is in Dying Light 2, it looks actually pretty incredible. There's some legacy things that you can still see from the original game, I think, if you look at it like very closely. But for the most part, it looked like kind of the difference that we're seeing in Red Engine, I think, with CD Projekt Red's new game, Cyberpunk 2077. Like, it looked radically different, I think, in terms of just scope.
Yeah.
And things like indirect lighting lighting looked way better in Dying Light 2. It was like much more directional and things like that.
Yeah, I think they really ramped up the level of detail the engine is capable of displaying. And as you said, the indirect lighting is better. There's a lot of like the interior shadowed regions looked much more impressive, I think, to me. I'll be curious to see how the play between day and night works in this, since it has changed a little bit. So the thing that I'm curious about is that they said that they're actually aiming again for 60 frames per second on all platforms.
Yeah, yep.
That seems like quite a feat, because as you say, this is so Techland, of course, is a Polish studio, so it makes sense to mention CD Projekt Red there as well.
Yes.
And I feel like maybe it's been understated just how much of a massive improvement this engine is as well over the original. I mean, it really is a significant jump in terms of just overall rendering quality. I mean, one of the big holdovers I think I noticed is their anti-aliasing method still feels a little out of date.
Yes. Yeah, it still looks to be using that SMA T2X,
exactly.
Where you can see the ghosting, like you can even see it in Bad Blood here looking at this frame. You can see the ghosting like as the character swings.
Exactly.
It looks a little bit distracting, but at the higher frame rates we were playing at, like 144 hertz, it was pretty hard to see for most objects on the screen. But that's like a holdover that still looks to be in Dying Light 2 at the moment.
Still, it's an interesting approach the studio is taking here, because while they're working on a sequel to a very successful game with most of the studio, they told us that they formed another team essentially to create this Bad Blood expansion. And this isn't the only way that they've sort of continued to support the game. Like, if you actually look at what they've been doing for the Dying Light fans over the years, like, it's really impressive. Like, there's been a lot of stuff released for this game. There's like a lot of updates for it.
Yeah.
You know, there was the following release, the extra content there.
I feel like it's flown a bit under the radar too, because its popularity seems to have, I mean, I haven't read that much about it after it came out, other than the release of the expansions, essentially.
There's just a lot of people playing it.
There's just a lot of people still playing it, and I think it's a testament to how co-op games can kind of have a longevity that you don't usually expect.
Yes.
And have they actually announced any co-op plans for Dying Light 2 at the moment? I don't recall off the top of my head.
I'm not sure they have, but I would really hope so, because the co-op, I think, is one of the coolest features of the original Dying Light. And I think what helps the game stand out in general is just the complexity and the nuance of the world design. Like, you look at a lot of open world games and it's a fairly straightforward affair. You know, buildings plop down, you got your streets, it seems more like a normal urban place. But the sort of urban sprawl instead that you get with Dying Light made it this sort of, it has a playground feel to it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's streets, but they're kind of like haphazard and broken, and you kind of jump around them instead of just cruising down them. That's a big difference, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So that was always kind of the thing that stuck out to me with that game, was just it really feels like I really like the world that they built, and I'm happy that they're continuing down that route of just extreme density in the environment detail, and just sort of like the overall layout of the city. So yeah, both Bad Blood and Dying Light 2 looking good. And it's so weird here to be talking about something like Bad Blood, because this is not typically the type of game that we've gone into,
No, far from, but
it really, I think both of us were pretty surprised and impressed by what the game had to offer.
Yeah, I mean, I remember laughing through a majority of my play. Obviously, this is a little separate from a tech discussion, but I was laughing a whole lot. I ended up killing myself twice in the game, by the way. You could see that right here and right here. Apparently, when you pull a grenade pin, it does eventually detonate. But so yeah, I was having a great time, and I think it was just them building on this engine here, making sure it runs fast. I didn't notice any technical hiccups, which is a big deal for a multiplayer game. So I hope it holds over to release at this point, and it should be interesting to see what they eventually do with the console versions should they come out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the thing I'm most curious about, because that was also kind of an interesting comparison point for console versus PC, not just in terms of performance, but in terms of LOD distance.
Oh gosh, yes.
PC's lowest settings for distant LODs was actually higher than what the consoles were using.
Yeah. And they, I think they even, at one point, there was kind of complaints about the ultra settings on PC being too high.
Oh,
and
yeah.
They actually reduced their ultra settings for the LODs, which
Oh, come on, guys.
That's a whole nother discussion.
Switch it to Super Ultra or something for the future.
My goodness. But yeah, I think that's enough for today talking about this. I really hope you enjoyed our discussion about this and got a taste of what it's like to play Bad Blood.
Bad Blood. I just like saying that.
I mean, yeah, I do too. I think our presenter at the stage also enjoyed saying Dying Light, Bad Blood. But okay, so thanks for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, please write a comment below or subscribe to our channel. If you are already a subscriber, look to hitting that button in the corner for notifications as soon as Digital Foundry posts a video. If you want to talk with me about Dying Light, Bad Blood, or John, follow us on Twitter. And as always, this is John and Alex.
Signing off. Or wait, playing more Bad Blood.